I was sent a video by one of the members on my Patreon. They wanted to see how you could create this vinyl CD kind of transition, and that's what we're going to be doing in this video. Now you can become a member on the Patreon as well by going down in the description or going to patreon.com/Mapal, where you can get access to all the project files for all the tutorials I make, like the one we're going to be doing today, and even the preset that I'm going to be showcasing a little bit later. But before we go into the tutorial itself, I have one question I need to ask you. If you had $100,000 to create whatever you wanted, what would you create? Well, today's video sponsor, Artlist, have just launched the Artlist 100K Fund, where you have the opportunity to make your creative dreams come true. All you have to do is submit your wildest, craziest, most epic dream project. It doesn't matter what type of creative you are. It could even be knitting the world's largest dog. It does not matter. It just has to be a super crazy and sick idea. So if you've always dreamt of creating something insane, now is your chance to have Artlist help you make it happen. As you're watching this video, the submissions are open, so you can go ahead and submit your idea, and they will be open until the 24th of October. All you have to do to enter to win the $100,000 is to submit your idea on social media. Just post a video explaining what your idea is, showcase it. You also got to make sure that you tag artlist.io in your post, as well as using the hashtag Artlist100K Fund. For all the details, you can head to artlist.io, or you can go down into the description where you can find the link where you can find all the details regarding this competition. Now, with that being said, we can head back into the tutorial and actually get started on creating this thing. Now, what we're going to be doing today might even spark an idea, so make sure you pay attention and that you submit your ideas. But essentially what we're going to be creating is this vinyl CD transition type of thing, and just a little bit of sauce. And the first part of that is, well, creating the vinyl and the CD. Luckily, that's pretty simple. And before I even get going into any of that, I'm just working in a 1920 by 1080 composition, just the usual, nothing fancy. It's 10 seconds, just so we have room to work with. I'm gonna use the ellipse tool, and I'm just gonna make sure that my fill is off and that my stroke is on. This is just to make it a little bit easier when we actually go in and animate it. Using a stroke is phenomenal, and we also need the hole in the middle anyways, so it's just like a win-win. But I'm just gonna start by holding shift and dragging to create a perfect circle, and then I just wanna make sure I center this up. So essentially, to this vinyl, we have two layers. We have the center, and then we have the outside, which is like the actual part of it. So this first one, we can just make sure that is our center. And I just wanna take this and I'm gonna type in size in my little search bar while having my layer selected. And I'm just gonna decrease the size a good bit. And I'm gonna play with the stroke width as well until we get something that looks pretty good. So maybe increase the size just a little bit like that, and just a little bit more wider. So that'll be our center. I'm gonna change the color of this to maybe like a brownish sort of thing to kind of match the vibes they had going on here, like a desaturated brownish reddish color. I think something like that will probably look pretty good. And we're just gonna rename this vinyl center, and I'm gonna duplicate this, just put it below, and just name this vinyl outside. Now I can take this, and again, I'm just gonna, with my layer selected, I can just hit enter because we still have the size in there. And I'm just gonna scale this up a good bit. And I'm gonna go ahead and change the color to, I'll maybe give it the slightest blue tint, but we want it to essentially look like a vinyl, which is kind of like a blackish, grayish color. And we'll just play around with the size of this a little bit. So maybe decrease that a little bit. And we might even wanna make this just a little bit smaller like that. And then decrease the width and play around. So it's kind of like a fine dance between the two elements. And we can increase the width of this and maybe scale this down just a little bit. So something like that looks pretty good. Now typically a vinyl would be a lot bigger than a CD, but in our example they're the same size, so we just want to make sure that the proportions somewhat look right. Now that's pretty much it for designing the actual vinyl itself. I mean, it already kind of looks like a vinyl. Now we can add a little bit of extra spice to it, so we can just duplicate this vinyl outside, and I'm just gonna name this vinyl highlight, and that'll just give us a slight bit of texture in here. And I just wanna set the color to a little bit lighter than what we have it already, like that. And then I wanna decrease it a whole bunch, so it's just like a thin edge, as you can see here. And I'm just gonna scale this up using the size once again until we get to just the edge of it. And worst case, we can always use a set map, but if we can get the size perfect, that is awesome. So something like that looks pretty good. So now we just have a little highlight edge, which kind of simulates the edge of a vinyl. What I'm gonna do now is basically leave this alone. I'm just gonna select all of this, and I'm just gonna change the color to, let's say, red, so we can differentiate the layers from one another. So vinyl is red, CD is gonna be a different color. And it'll be the same technique. We can use the ellipse tool, or you can just duplicate whatever you want to do. I'm just going to select the ellipse tool again, and I'm just going to change the color to a little bit of a different color, maybe like a dark gray type of color, just so it looks a little bit different in the center. And again, I just want to center this up, and then I'm just going to change this to CD inside. A typical CD, like the middle of a CD, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a CD, which I hope you have, otherwise you're very young, but a CD is typically clear in the middle, which can be a bit hard to translate in this space. So what they've decided to do in the example that we're following today is just keep it pretty dark. So we're just gonna follow suit, but we are gonna make this a little bit smaller. So we just have a little bit of differentiation because the holes are just different, and it just adds a little bit to the look that it's not identical. And then we're just gonna duplicate this and again, put it below, and we're just gonna name this CD outside, like that. And then we can take the size of this one and scale it up a good bit. And here we just want it to be the same size as what we have out here. I am, however, gonna change the color just a little bit for now to a lighter color, since that is like a typical CD color. And we're just gonna play around with the stroke until we get something that works for us. And we might even be as lucky as we can just keep it right there. So now they're the same size. We have the CD middle, we have the CD outside. Perfect, perfect, perfect. So far, so good. I am, however, actually gonna change this to a darker color. Again, we're gonna go kind of dark blue here. And the reason for that is that this specific animation takes inspiration from the Yeezus album, which you guys might know if you're into Kanye West or music in general. It has this CD as the cover, and that is where the inspiration for all the colors of the CD are gonna come from, since it's a video about that album. So we're just gonna keep that to make sure that we have the shadows of what that looks like. So that looks pretty good. We can add some more texture to this. So what I'm gonna do actually is just create a slight rim around the outside here and the outside over here as well. And I'm just gonna duplicate this, and we're just gonna name this CD highlight small. And I'm just gonna change this color to a little bit of a lighter color here. Boom. And then we can take the stroke width down a whole bunch. And we just want it very, very faint, and then search for the size. And we're just gonna scale this down until we get right on it. And the good thing about this is that this is layered pretty good. So nice little rim, might even make it slightly less, you know, just a little bit less. It's just very, very faint, as you can see. And we're gonna duplicate this and just call it big instead, and search up the size again. And we're just gonna move this out and decrease the width of the stroke a little bit, and just until we get to be the right size here. So now we have a little outside and inside, and for the highlight big, we might even make it just a little bit lighter, just so we have some more differentiation in there. So nice little highlight rim right there. So now we can save. Always make sure to save your project a whole bunch. Now we have the base of our CD ready, but one thing that's very distinct about the CDs is the color diffractions, or whatever you want to call them. So whenever the light hits the CD at a certain angle, you get all these crazy colors because of the coating that's on it. I think it's the coating anyways. Now to create this look, what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna just hide the CD or the vinyl for now and everything but the CD outside. And then I'm gonna create a new layer by hitting Command Y, just a solid, and we'll just name this CD Shine. Now, I've already created a preset that you can get on my Patreon as well as this project file, so it'll just speed it up a little bit. Otherwise, we can create it from scratch, and then you can save it yourself. What we're gonna be doing here is first adding a fractal noise, because that is just gonna help us generate the colors where we want them, and we're just gonna change this to a block. And then we are gonna decrease the complexity all the way down to 1, so it just gets very defined blocks. Now we're gonna change the transform settings. We're just gonna open up that transform and deselect uniform scaling. And I'm just gonna make sure that we have some very nice stretched lines, just all the way stretched. And you can always skinny them up a little bit, just kind of depending on the look that you're going for. A good tip is to play around with this in the end as well, just to really fine tune your look once you've added everything else and you kind of see it stylized. But that is pretty much it that we're gonna touch in the fractal noise for now. So we can just close that up for now, just so we don't get overwhelmed. Next, we're gonna add some false box blur, and we're just gonna increase it just a good bit. And that's just gonna help smooth over the colors a little bit. You can see it looks a little bit smoother. We can increase the iterations. We can always play around with this later as well, but just for now, this will be plenty good. And we can just make sure you have repeat edge pixels turned on. Now we are gonna add CC sphere, and you'll very quickly see why this is super cool. So now it creates this kind of globe look, but we just want the lines to look like they're bursting out from the center. So we're gonna open up the rotation, and we're just gonna move the rotation of the X position to 90 degrees, and all of a sudden, you have it stretching out from the center, which is exactly what we want. Now we can increase the radius to make it fit a little bit bigger than everything else, so we get a nice, nice coverage. We can play around with the lighting and shading, so I'm just gonna set the ambient to 100 just so we don't really have too much shading, and we can play around with the light intensity a little bit. Just set that to 0 so it's nice and even. You can play around with this however you want, create the look that you want. I just want it to be flat. Now we are gonna add another fast box blur just to add a little bit more source this time. It's just very, very subtle. Just set it to something like 3, and that's just to get some of the distortion in the middle, kind of so it's not super sharp down here, and then it fades out a little bit, so it just kind of smooths it out, make sure that our lights are gonna be even. And now we're gonna get to the fun part, which is colorama, which will control everything. Now the colors that you wanna use for this will be just completely up to you. In this instance, like I said, this is inspired by Asus, so it's kind of those colors, but you just wanna play around with some of these colors. You can create your own palettes, you can use custom palettes. The preset that I will be including with this project file, if you're a member on the Patreon, will include a colorama that's already stylized, which is what I'm gonna be ending up using. I'm just playing around with some colors for now so you can see, kind of get the look of what you wanna do here. And you can really have fun with this and create some really cool looking gradients, really up to you. But we're just gonna leave it on, let's just do 5 for now. That'll work just for this preview until I switch it over to the preset that I have. You can add a set map to this, which will just let you essentially link it to a layer, or use a specific layer as our little cutting mask without actually linking it. So we can set it to CD outside, and just like that, we have it cut out. Now I'm just gonna switch over to the preset I've made because it's a little bit sexier with the color palette that I have. And boom. I have my lovely little preset here, and it also includes keyframes, so you don't even have to worry about animating. It already has a little bit of spinning of the light, so it gives it just a little bit more movement, which I essentially just did by messing around with the evolution of the fractal noise, and then I also changed the offset turbulence. So if I go into transform, you can see the offset turbulence, which just moves it left and right. And then I also played around with the rotation in CC sphere. So if I open up the rotation here, you can see I played around with the Y rotation to get it to spin a little bit. And it's just a good idea to have some of this, because in the real world, whenever you move the CD slightly, the light changes. So it's really just to play around with that look. Now, as you can see right now, it covers the full thing, which is not really what we want if we look at the example, the Asus album. So what we can do actually to fake it a little bit is our CD outside, we're just gonna duplicate that, and we're just gonna name this CD mask. And in our CD shine, we'll just change it so it's actually linked to the right one. We'll just pick the CD mask. And then in the CD mask, we are gonna open it up, and we are gonna add a trim paths, just like that. And then we're just gonna take this first one, let's cut it up a little bit like that maybe, and you can play around with the offset so you get the right colors you want and all that good stuff. So let's put that to 85 like that, and then we can add another trim paths and do the opposite on the other side. So trim paths, set the end to 85 again, and then just change the offset to be exactly where you want it. So kind of opposite of where we have it now. That looks pretty good. And you can even link these. So I'll link this to that one just by pick whipping. And then whenever I extend this, we get kind of this opposite kind of movement, and we can play around a little bit with the turbulent or the offset of stuff. And then we can always move it around. So maybe just take this and just move it a little bit so we have it straight up and straight down, because that is how it is in the example. So as of right now, this is what we have for our CD animation. Now you can see these edges are super hard. So what we can do is in our CD mask, we'll just add a fast box blur and just increase that a little bit so that we get some of those edges not be as hard. So now you can see we have a little bit of this overspilling. So we're just gonna add a set matte to our CD mask itself, and we'll just change that to CD outside. We'll just increase the scale of this a little bit and the stroke width. Boom. So now we have beautiful little fade right here, and we can play around with this just to make sure it's not too faded. Just a little bit of a smooth edge there, just so we get a nice little easy line over. And now if I turn the rest of this back on, you can see we just get a nice little CD looking thing, and we can play around with the opacity of our highlights in here, just to let a little bit of that through so it's not a complete cutout. Boom, that looks pretty good. You can also play with blending modes and colors. Another thing you can do if you want to add just a little bit more detail is copy the CD shine. And this time what we're going to do is, instead of using the CD mask, we're just going to do the CD outside. And then we are going to change the blending mode and opacity of this just by clicking shift and minus and plus. So something like color works pretty good, and I'm just going to place it below our actual shine. So we just get a little bit of that detail even there, and then we can play around with the opacity too, just so it's not super in your face. But just like that, we just have a little bit of detail there. I might even take it down even more to something like 20%. So just super subtle, but it just gives it just a little bit more texture, which we like. Now looking at this, I do want to change the color of the CD inside. I just want to make it a little bit darker just for a little bit more contrast here. Something like that is pretty good. And then the CD outside, I just want to make that just a little less saturated. Now that we have the base of our vinyl and we have the base of our CD, we can actually go ahead and start playing with the animations. First, I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to turn this into blue. Bada bing, bada boom, just so it's all the same because it's the CD. So for the transition, I'm just going to be using a trim paths, and I'm just going to hide all of these layers for now, and I'm just going to focus on the vinyl first. And I'm just going to hide everything actually and just open this up, and then I'm going to add a trim paths, and then the trim paths, open that up, and then we're going to play around with the start and the end values. Now you want to decide which way you want it to animate in. I know I want mine to start at 100%, so it goes counterclockwise. So keyframe that, go forward about, let's do 3 seconds, and I'm just gonna set that to 0, and then I am gonna keyframe the end, and I'm gonna move that to, let's say 6 seconds, and set that to 0 as well. So just like that, we have a nice little, it comes in, scroll, 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 boom, closes, and then back up. And for now, I'm just gonna keep the easing at nothing, and then we'll ease it later once we have all of them in, because we need it to be pretty seamless, and we need to make sure that all our easing works together well. So I'm just gonna leave it at nothing for now. I'm gonna take all of this, I'm gonna copy it, and then I can take my 2 other vinyl layers and I can paste that on there, just Command C, Command V, and just like that, we have it animating in and then animating out. Very smooth. Now we can take the rest of this, boom, open that up, and we can take all of this except for these 2, and you can paste that on there, hit U, and just move these keyframes up to meet right at 3 seconds. So now once we play that back, it's like a seamless little transition between the 2. Bada bam, bada boom. Now, as you can see, it does mess up a little bit in terms of how our colors come in. So what we can do is maybe just even remove the trim paths from this completely. For our mask, we'll just delete that one. And then that should be in right as we come in. So boom, and let's just take all of these, a little out keyframes, and make sure we get this layer down here too, and just move that over to the last bit. Select all these and over. So far, this is what we have. We have it coming in, and then it's gonna transition into the other one. And I definitely wanna mess around a little bit with this because you can see it stops. So I'm just gonna open up my shine keyframes here, and I just want to make sure that they are lined up pretty good here. So maybe as the CD's coming in, we can take these keyframes and move them over here. So let's start it right about here. Boom, drag these over and play that back. We now get something that should just look a little bit nicer. Yeah, we just have a little bit more movement in there, which is super nice. And then we just want to make sure that this out animation actually times up with the end. So let's just take these, move them out like that, and just so we get a little bit of that motion there as it finishes up. There's a couple different ways that you can ease these keyframes. You can either go in and manually do this all by yourself, where you go in and match the easing of all of this, or another tip is you can use time remapping to ease some of those keyframes. So what you can do is if you select everything and pre-comp it, and we're just gonna name this vinyl /CD pre, and I'm just gonna go to the very beginning. I'm gonna right click, and then I'm gonna go to time, enable time remapping, and then I'm just gonna go forward, and let's say at about 1 second and 12 frames, I'm just gonna move this forward to be fully collapsed right there, and then I'm gonna move forward again until 3 seconds, and again I'm just gonna do fully collapsed. And now if I take these, if I take all of these, I can add some sexy speed to it, for example, and that should ease the keyframes a little bit more, so boom. So just like that, we have some ease keyframes, which just make it look a little bit smoother, and it's a lot easier than having to do it yourself. It's just a little trick. You might as well, you know, if you've got it available to you, why not use it? But that is pretty much it for the animation itself. You can, of course, you can add motion blur to all of this if you want to. Go in here, add motion blur. Just kind of depends on the look. Now, one thing that they did actually add in the example is to the vinyl, we will take a duplicate of the outside, and we're just going to duplicate this 2 times and put it right behind. And that's just to add a little bit of character to it. And we're just going to take this animation. Let's take this bottom one and just move it over 1, 2, 3 keyframes, then take all of this and just move it back 1, 2, 3. And then we're just gonna change the color of this. So one was red and one was white. And let's just flip these around, boom. And maybe move that over just a little bit and that over. So we just get a little bit of that initial movement here. So it's just a little detail thing just to make it feel a little bit more complete. And then you of course want to play around with the easing of this so you can actually make them end at the same time, all of them. So take all of these, hit U, make sure they all end at pretty much the same time, like that, something like that, just to offset it just a little bit so it's a little bit different in the way it looks. And we can even take all of this and just move it up just a little bit so we have that right before it kind of begins. We have those coming in, blah, 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 bada bam, bada boom. Take these and open up the size, play around with the stroke width a little bit, boom, and play around with the size of both of these. And the easiest way to do that is just link them, boom, and make sure you have both selected. Again, you can link the stroke width too, but for now, this will be plenty good. Something like that maybe, and then take the size of this bad boy. That looks pretty good. And go back into our main composition. So now we have something that looks kind of like this. Just super, super simple, super sexy, nice little CD transition. And all there's left to do is adding the sauce, which I love. So for this, we're gonna keep it pretty simple. We are gonna add some glows to this, and we are gonna add some halftone textures to the whole thing, just because that's the style that we're going for, and it's just sexy. So for the glows, we're actually gonna keep it pretty simple. We just wanna add the glows to the shine itself, because that is, well, the shiny part. So we can just add a deep glow to this. Deep glow is just a great glow plugin. It's better than just a regular glow that's kind of built in. We can just add that in there, increase this a little bit, decrease this a little bit, so it's not super, actually maybe even decrease this a little bit. Because we don't need it to be super crazy glow, we just need it to be, we want it to be a bit thick in the glows. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of a problem, which is that the glow doesn't go over this, which normally it would. So what you can do is if you take the CD inside, put it below that, that will kind of solve your problem a little bit. To get this to match up, you just want to go to the CD outside, because that is essentially what we have all of it linked to, and you want to play around with the size and the stroke width. So we are just gonna take this bad boy, decrease the stroke width a little bit, couple pixels here, boom, and just increase the size just a little bit so we get out to that edge that we have out there. It's just like a very fine tuning type of game. We can just take this inside one, let's just make it just a little bit bigger, boom, like that. And that gives us that nice little glow that we have on the CD shine. Play around with this, maybe even just set it down to like 300 or something like that. So nice and thick, maybe set that to 0.5, really thicken that up. And maybe even animate it just a little bit so it's brighter right as it comes in. So let's say right here is when it starts going down to what we want it to be. So right around, maybe just set that to something like 0.3 on this one, then go back to where it kind of starts and increase that a whole bunch. So maybe like 1 in the beginning and maybe like 500. So it's really bright as it comes in and then just slows down. Going back into our main composition here, we should be able to see a nice little gradual like easing out. So playing that back, boom, we get a nice little bit of glow, boom. Nice and vibrant, super sexy. I love this little spill that's coming out here. And that's pretty much it for the CD vinyl itself. Now we can add the background, which is super easy to make actually, and it's just gonna add that little bit of flare as well as the halftone texture. Command Y to create a new solid, and we're just gonna change this color to a darkish bluish desaturated, almost kind of like the CD color itself. And we're gonna drag that below, and then we're gonna hit Command Y to create another layer, and we're just gonna name this grid and hit enter. It doesn't matter what color it is because we are gonna be adding the grid effect to it, which will change the color anyways. We're gonna change it to a width slider because that's gonna mean that we have squares, which is exactly what we want. So the first one, we're just gonna set the border down to something like 3, and then we're gonna increase the width of this a good bit. So we had some really big squares, something like this, and we can change the color to that reddish kind of muted dark red color. And then we're just gonna duplicate this, and this time we're just gonna decrease the border something like 1 and decrease the width slider a whole bunch, maybe even, let's try 2, just so it doesn't get too lost. And we're gonna make sure this is pretty small, and then we wanna zoom in here, and we just wanna make sure these line up. So just like that, just using some simple math, we'll just set the width of this to 20, the bigger ones to 200, and that should work. So now we have this nice little grid in the background, and for this one, we're just gonna make it a little bit more faint. So just make it a little bit darker, less saturated. Bada bam, bada boom. Pretty sexy here, and that's pretty much it for the background itself. Actually, it's that simple. So now we're gonna add a little bit of sauce. Now I'm gonna use a adjustment layer, and then I'm gonna add a halftone, BCC halftone. This is a paid plugin, but it is super neat, and it's probably one of the best halftones you can get. Now, if you don't have BCC plugin, you can just use a texture like from texturelabs.org. The great thing is they're free and they're super high quality. This one in particular, I think would work really well, and we can just scale this down so our halftone isn't too crazy. And we can use something like an extract effect actually to just only get the dots. So we're just gonna move that up, and might even add an invert to this actually. So boom, invert that, because I think I would like my dots to be white, and then I'm just gonna move that up, boom. So now we only have these white dots, and we can play around with the blend modes to get the look that we want, and then we can dial back the opacity and all that good stuff. So the overlay blend mode works super well, and you can see the type of texture we get right there. It's just beautiful. We can always play with the opacity as well if you want to dial it back just a little bit like that. And I think that looks super awesome. All that's left to do is take these 3 background layers. Let's add a void to this, or a null, and then we're just gonna hit P and Shift R, and we're just gonna add an expression to these. So I'm gonna alt click position, and then I'm just gonna type posterized time, and we'll set that to something like 6, and we're just gonna do a wiggle. Let's do a 15,3 here, boom. And we can just scale this up just a little bit so we don't get that spill on the edges. And then on the rotation, we're gonna do another posterized time, and we'll set that to something like 3, and wiggle 1,5 I think would work pretty good. So it's just a slight bit of wiggle, maybe even lower this a little bit. Let's do 2 and 5. 5,2 I think would look maybe just a little bit better. So just a very subtle little rotation / position to the background. And that's pretty much it for the main look of it. I mean, that's mostly done. What you can do is add a little 3D movement to this. You can just go into the 3D, enable that, hit rotation, just make sure you're in classic 3D, that'll probably work the best for this. And we can just add a little bit of rotation. So we know we want it to be straight on by the time the CD comes in here. So I'm just gonna hit shift and boom. So straight on, keyframe all this. Go right here, maybe to where it kind of closes up, maybe lay it down just a little bit, that. And then at the beginning, maybe let's turn it around a little bit, add a little bit more movement to it, boom. And we can move that over. And let's add some easing to these keyframes. I'm just gonna do 60 speed, boom. Now we have something that looks kind of like this, and I think that is pretty sick. Last thing I wanna do is add some posterized time to this. Well, not fully lasting, but semi-lasting is adding some posterized time, setting that to 12, and then underneath all this, I'm gonna add a solid, and I've done this effect multiple times. We're just gonna add a super sick, thick grain to this. I'm gonna set the solid to 80-80-80, which is middle gray, and we'll just name this grain. Then we are gonna add the add grain effect to this, like such, and let's set that to final output preset. I just like one of the Kodak ones. 800T will probably work pretty good. And then for the intensity, I like taking that up to 1.3, same with the size. And then in the application, I like changing it to film, which just gives it a slightly different look. And then I'm gonna add a tint effect to this, which is just gonna make sure that it has black and white values, which is important for the next step, which is pre-comping them, move all attributes into the new composition, and just make sure you name this grain pre. Well, you don't have to, but it's good. And then change the blend mode to overlay. So now we just have that nice grain in there. You can see if I turn off the texture, you get that nice thick grain. You can also set it to linear light if you want something a little bit harsher, and then maybe just decreasing the opacity of it just a little bit, and turn the half-tone back on, and that's just gonna give you extra texture in there, which is really, really thick. That is pretty much it for that animation. That is how you create this little vinyl CD transition animation. Super cool. I love using colorama in this way. Again, you can get the preset for this as well as the project file on my Patreon at patreon.com/Mapal. And hopefully you are inspired to create something super sick that you could submit to Artlist to get a chance to win the Artlist 100K fund, which is a super sick opportunity for everyone to create something that they've always dreamt of. So make sure to check out the details for that in the description below. I'll also have my most linked sound effects, which are all from Artlist as well, linked in the description as well, so you can get some of those. That's what I use to sound design this and everything else. So head down there, there's a bunch of good stuff in the description. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed, hopefully you learned something new, feel inspired. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Peace out.